The announcement arrived without drama and without warning. A brief statement delivered in a calm voice explained that the matter had been reviewed thoroughly and that no further action was required. The case was considered resolved. The language was precise, the tone was final, too final. People listening felt it immediately. Not relief, not closure. A tightening in the chest that comes when an ending arrives before understanding has had time to form. The case had been closed, but nothing felt complete. In the days that followed, the city behaved as if it had been instructed to move on. News cycles shifted, schedules resumed, faces returned to rehearsed expressions. Yet underneath the surface, something remained unsettled. The silence did not lift, it condensed. Those who had followed the story closely noticed how quickly the pivot occurred. Files that had been discussed openly were no longer referenced. Timelines that once appeared fluid hardened overnight. Conversations ended faster than they began. Speed became the message. The first strange scene unfolded at a press briefing meant to address unrelated matters. A reporter asked a question that brushed too close to the case. The official paused. Not long, just long enough. Then the answer came rehearsed and empty. The question was not asked again. Later that afternoon, a public database was updated. Several entries connected indirectly to the case were marked, reviewed, and archived. No explanation accompanied the update. No summary was provided. Archiving without explanation is a form of erasure that pretends to be organization. People noticed. They had learned to notice. The case had been closed, but the mechanisms around it were still moving. That contradiction fueled suspicion. If everything was resolved, why did systems continue to adjust? Menglong, absence remained the quiet center of it all. His name was no longer mentioned officially, yet his presence shaped every decision. It hovered in phrasing, in avoidance. In the careful way, people corrected themselves mid-sentence. The industry responded with coordinated calm. Statements echoed one another. Language aligned across platforms. Reassurance was repeated until it began to feel brittle. Confidence overused becomes evidence of strain. Behind-the-scenes documents were reclassified. Access permissions changed. Review committees disbanded as quickly as they had formed. The architecture of inquiry was dismantled piece by piece, not because questions were answered, but because they persisted. Fab Shaki behavior shifted again. He did not celebrate the closure. He did not comment on it at all. Instead, he withdrew further. Appearances were minimal. Words were measured. He looked less relieved than resigned. Those watching understood the implication. Closure had not freed anyone. It had contained them. A quiet incident days later deepened the unease. A routine system audit revealed missing metadata in archived files. Dates were present. Titles remained. But descriptive fields were empty. Someone had stripped context without removing content. That act alone raised more questions than any rumor ever could. Why preserve files but remove meaning? The official explanation cited standard procedure. Standard procedure had never felt so selective. Another scene unfolded in a courtroom where an unrelated case was being heard. During a recess, a lawyer mentioned the closed matter casually. The room shifted. Conversation stopped. A clerk asked for silence. The judge did not acknowledge the reference. The moment passed, but those present remembered it. The case had been closed, but it was still exerting gravity. People began compiling their own timelines, not to accuse, to understand. They compared announcements to reactions, decisions to hesitations, closures to consequences. Patterns emerged. Every time attention threatened to resurface, something else was expedited. A release, a resignation, a distraction. Power was not hiding truth. It was outrunning it. Menglong's absence made this more visible than ever. His silence forced others to fill the space with behavior, and behavior revealed more than words. One evening, a panel discussion aired with no reference to the case. Yet one panelist spoke about the dangers of premature certainty. He did not name names. He did not cite events. The message landed anyway. The clip spread quietly. It was removed quietly. The removal spoke louder. The industry began to feel smaller. Not physically, psychologically. Boundaries tightened. Creativity narrowed. Risk tolerance evaporated. Everyone moved as if the floor might shift again. The case closure had not restored stability. It had frozen it. Fab Shiki appeared once more at a public event weeks later. When asked about moving forward, he nodded and spoke about focus and responsibility. He did not smile. When asked about lessons learned, he paused, then answered carefully. He said some endings arrive before understanding, and that time has a way of reopening what is sealed too tightly. That line traveled far. It was quoted, then corrected, then removed. People saved it. Questions continued to surface in private. Why did the review conclude so quickly? Why were alternative explanations dismissed without discussion? Why did oversight end when curiosity peaked? None of these questions were answered publicly. They were simply waited out. That strategy had worked before. It was working less now. Menglong case had closed on paper but remained open in perception. The difference mattered. Because perception shapes trust, and trust once fractured does not repair easily. The final scene of this phase occurred quietly in an office where a single folder remained on a shelf long after others were cleared away. No label, no date, just presence. Someone noticed it. Someone asked about it. No one answered. The case was closed. But questions do not require permission to exist. They linger. They move. They wait. And when truth is rushed to conclusion, it does not disappear. It accumulates. Menglong's absence ensured that. The closure had arrived too fast, and everything left behind was still breathing. Official calm spread quickly, yet it did not feel earned. It felt imposed, like a curtain drawn too early before the audience had finished watching the stage. People adjusted their routines, but not their attention. The first sign of strain appeared in unexpected places. A public archive reopened for unrelated material, and users noticed entire weeks missing from the index. The files were not deleted. They were misdated. Events appeared out of order. Causes followed effects. The timeline bent. Those who had learned to read absence understood immediately. Someone had tried to straighten the story and twisted it instead. Behind closed doors, conversations grew cautious. Words like final and resolved were used more often than necessary. Repetition replaced explanation. Authority leaned on certainty, as if certainty itself could do the work of truth. It could not. A small conference was held with no press and no broadcast. Attendees were instructed not to record. The stated purpose was alignment. The real purpose was reassurance. Speakers emphasized closure and stability. They avoided specifics. They spoke in generalities that sounded safe. During a break, one attendee asked quietly why closure had come before clarity. No one answered. That silence lingered longer than any speech. Outside the building, a group gathered without signs or chants. They did not protest. They waited. When asked what they were doing, one person replied simply that they were watching for what came next. That phrase traveled. Watching became the new language. The industry responded by tightening process. Additional review layers were added. Approvals required more signatures. Decisions slowed. The machinery grew heavier with each safeguard meant to protect it. Weight became the problem. A scheduled release was delayed without explanation. When it finally appeared, the content had been altered subtly. Not censored. Softened. The edges rounded. The meaning dulled. Viewers noticed the difference immediately. They compared versions. Screenshots spread quietly. Trust eroded a little more. Fab Shiki remained mostly silent. When he did appear, he spoke in careful arcs that avoided commitment. He referenced teams instead of individuals. He used passive phrasing that distanced action from intent. Those who understood systems recognized the shift. Responsibility was being redistributed. Another curious event followed. A minor regulatory update was announced affecting unrelated sectors. Buried deep in the language was a clause expanding archival authority. It allowed for reclassification without public notice. Most people missed it. Those watching did not. They understood this was not about control going forward. It was about managing the past. Menglong's absence continued to shape perception. His silence made the adjustments louder. Every attempt to smooth the narrative drew attention to what was being smoothed over. One evening, a panel discussion aired focusing on transparency. The guests spoke earnestly about trust and accountability. Halfway through the program, a technical issue cut the audio briefly. When sound returned, the conversation had shifted topics. Viewers replayed the interruption. They noticed a word cut mid-sentence. Archive. The clip was edited in re-uploads. The original lived on. Pressure built in small, precise ways. Not through outrage, but through accumulation. Each minor inconsistency stacked atop the last. Each correction introduced another question. The case was closed, but effort was increasing. That contradiction became impossible to ignore. A quiet resignation followed, then another. Each departure framed as personal choice. None replaced quickly. Roles were absorbed temporarily. Temporarily became indefinite. Institutions do not hollow overnight. They thin. Fab behavior reflected the thinning. He avoided spontaneous interaction. He stopped correcting others when they misspoke. He listened more than he talked. He nodded at conclusions he once would have challenged. Observers described him as distant. But distance was not disinterest. It was calculation. A closed-door meeting leaked one line from a prepared statement. "We must prevent reopening." That line spread faster than intended. It reframed everything. If reopening was feared, then closure had failed. The public did not demand answers immediately. They began preserving questions. Notes were shared. Timelines rebuilt. A reporter asked an unscripted question about memory and accountability. Fab paused longer than expected. For a moment, it looked like he might answer directly. Then he adjusted his tone. "We must look forward." That phrase landed flat. Looking forward had become code. The next interesting event came from an unexpected source. A private tech firm released an update explaining a minor system outage months earlier. Buried in the explanation was a reference to delayed synchronization affecting public-facing logs. It was framed as technical trivia, but it explained a lot. The outage window matched a critical period. The update disappeared within hours. Screenshots did not. Another meeting occurred behind closed doors. This one included people who had not been present before. They asked sharper questions. They requested comparisons rather than summaries. They were less interested in conclusions and more interested in process. Process tells stories, conclusions hide. The answers satisfied no one. When institutions grow defensive, they reveal patterns. Emails multiplied. Meetings stacked. Decision trees branched unnecessarily. The system began talking to itself. That is when cracks appear. Public trust did not collapse. It thinned. People stopped expecting clarity from announcements. They started listening to what was not emphasized. Silence around certain names grew louder. Menglong absence continued to shape the narrative without participation. The space he left behind had become a measuring stick. Each official statement was weighed against that silence. None balanced. An anniversary passed with minimal acknowledgement. No statement, no reflection. Just routine programming and standard schedules. The lack of marking felt deliberate. Deliberate choices invite interpretation. A private letter surfaced written by someone once adjacent to the case. It did not accuse. It did not reveal. It simply described discomfort with how quickly certainty had been reached. The letter ended with a single line. "Time remembers what systems forget." That line circulated widely. Internally, a review committee expanded its scope. Not publicly announced, not formally named. Its mandate was framed as preventative. But prevention requires understanding origins. Origins lead backward. Backward was where no one wanted to look. The most telling moment came quietly during a training seminar. An instructor used a hypothetical scenario that mirrored the case too closely. Participants exchanged glances. The instructor stopped mid-sentence. They switched examples. That hesitation said more than any report. Meanwhile, small independent platforms continued archiving material. Interviews, clips, commentary. Nothing sensational, just preservation. Preservation is power when narratives are fragile. Fab Shaki withdrew again. His absence mirrored Yu Menglong in a strange echo. Not in meaning, in effect. Silence producing speculation. Distance producing questions. The system had taught the public how to read between lines. Now it could not stop them. The case remained closed,